Hey guys, this is Philosophossum. I was originally going to work on my 100 sub special, but the COVID hysteria has seemed to rear its ugly head again, so that for the time being will have to go back on the back burner.
Hello everyone, no intro today, just gonna get straight to the video because there's just too much bullshit.
Yes, there is too much bullshit out there of people spreading around fear to try and have our liberties taken away. That's why I do what I do.
Ladies and gentlemen, the face burqa, the dehumanizing symbol of submission to the new regime.
Yeah, face masks are a dehumanizing symbol of submission.
They weren't always that way. There was a time when you could wear a mask in public and nobody would give a rat's ass. It wasn't until the left wing tried imposing them onto everybody that people suddenly started seeing them as symbols of oppression.
Looks like you're putting a lot of effort in making yourself sound fancy, but not a lot of thought in the actual contents of your script.
Well, I mean, we haven't actually got to the contents of a script yet. That was just the thesis line. You'd think that Mr. Biology Professor here would understand that the purpose of a thesis is to introduce the opinion or point of view being argued, not to elaborate on reasons to support that conclusion. That's done after the thesis.
Unless, of course, you actually believe that. Why am I not surprised that computing forever would see something as simple as a protective measure to control the spread of COVID-19 as some sort of human controlling order?
Because it is a human controlling order. When you're going up to a human with a gun saying, put on a mask or I'll hurt you, you are essentially controlling that human. Even if in your opinion this is a justified measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19, it's still, at the end of the day, human controlling.
If you refuse to wear it, you won't be allowed entry into certain places.
Face masks greatly reduce the chances of spreading the virus to other people.
So do face masks actually help reduce the spread of COVID-19? Well, yes and no. I mean, they can potentially reduce the spread of COVID-19, but it's not quite that simple, as we'll get into later in the video.
In certain places, such as grocery stores or public transportation vehicles where people can be in very close proximity to each other, we can reduce transmission significantly if everyone wears a face mask.
Well, sure, I'll agree that there may be certain locations where there may be a higher risk of transmitting the virus, and perhaps you could make an argument to justify mandating masks in those particular locations. The problem is a lot of places are mandating masks across the board, not just in these particular locations.
That's just simply how viruses that spread through respiratory droplets work. So of course certain places are going to require people to wear face masks. It's not like it infringes upon your well-being in any significant way. Computing forever disagrees with this, but we'll get to that later.
Well, I mean, if a private business owner decides that they want to require customers wear masks as a condition of doing business there, that's not necessarily problematic. Most people would agree that business owners have a right to make reasonable decisions regarding the safety of their establishment. If you disagree with the rules of one establishment, you can of course go to a different one. What's causing a lot of people to raise eyebrows over these mask mandates is that they're not always being implemented by private businesses. A lot of places they're being implemented by the government. The government is requiring businesses to make their customers wear masks, which from a liberty standpoint is a little dubious.
But it's all for your own good, just like when the time comes, you won't be allowed to do all manner of things or freely move around without proof of immunity or vaccination. It's do as we say or else.
It's not for your own good, it's for everyone else's.
Oh boy, here we go again, the rhetoric about how the mask doesn't protect you, it protects those around you. This is commonly used as a rhetorical strategy to try and strawman people who criticize mask mandates as selfish, not caring about others. Granted, it's not always used that way, but more often than not, that's the intention.
People are being required to wear regular masks, not the N95 ones. Regular masks protect you from spreading the virus to other people, but it's not really effective at protecting yourself.
Actually, there is some research that suggests that even plain surgical masks can be effective at protecting the wearer as well as those around them. I mean, just think about it for a minute. If you're a surgeon who's performing an operation on somebody, you're cutting open and dealing with the inside of a person's body. You're dealing with all different sorts of fluids, bacteria, Lord knows what. And while you probably don't want to infect the patient, you would probably also want the mask to prevent the patient from infecting you. Think about it for a minute. If you were in a medical profession, if you were around people who are sick or dealing with all different types of tissues, fluids, Lord knows what, and you you were handed a mask and told, here, it protects them but not you, I'd be like, no thank you.
The idea is that if everyone is wearing the mask, then everyone is protected. You are protected from the fact that others are wearing the mask, so you have to also do your part and protect other people from you.
So when people argue that everyone has to be wearing a mask in order for the masks to work, this is essentially an admission that the masks are basically worthless. Because even if that were true, that everyone had to be wearing a mask in order for them to be effective, there's basically no chance in hell of that ever happening. The government does not have the resources to monitor every single person constantly to make sure that they're wearing a mask. The resources and manpower to make sure that everybody's wearing a mask constantly simply don't exist. The best you can hope for is a majority of the population.
It's not a controlling thing, it's not a power thing.
So if this really is about genuine concern over health rather than just being a power grab, why are people being required to wear the inferior mask that only protects in one direction? I don't know about you, but if I was concerned about people's health and there were two types of masks, one only protects in one direction, the other protects in both directions, I would probably be supporting the mask that protects in both directions, no?
I mean, what's next? Requiring people to wear clothing and not to be naked in public spaces is also some sort of do what we say or else?
Well, again, like I said before, private property owners have the right to set the terms and conditions of the use of their property, so a business owner has the right to say, if you want to come in here, you can't be naked. But they can also, usually accompanied with some sort of age restriction of course, decide to make their venue clothing optional. In places like Las Vegas, clothing optional nightclubs are a thing. Actually, now that I think about it, I think there's a bar in Florida that has a swimming pool out back where women aren't required to wear bikini tops. They probably still have to wear bottoms, I think. But again, this is all at the behest of the property owner. Now, if an old dude is walking down the street in the buff with his scrotum hanging 2 inches from the ground, do I want to see that? Well, not particularly, but he's not objectively hurting anybody or violating anybody's rights, so I suppose just look a different direction.
It also has to be said that a mask that literally covers a person's mouth seems somewhat reflective of our time of censorship and restrictions on free speech, because it resembles a muzzle.
You're actually pathetic.
I think that was more intended as a joke rather than a point he was actually trying to get across, but there is some validity to the idea that this is definitely a time and a situation where a lot of people are being silenced. It seems like in a lot of cases people who criticize mask mandates or shutdown orders, regardless of what arguments or data they may happen to have to back up their claims, are always told to shut up and listen to the science.
But there are those who have been speaking out about the usage of masks by healthy people. Dr. Dan Erickson has previously said the following:
when you wear gloves that transfer disease everywhere, those gloves have bacteria all over them. I'm wearing gloves. Not helping you.
What this doctor is saying right now is actually completely true. You see, gloves keep things sanitary only up to a certain point. At a certain point, the gloves become so saturated with bacteria and grime that you're actually spreading it around and making things less sanitary by wearing the gloves. This is why that in order for gloves to be effective in keeping things sanitary, they have to be periodically replaced. And well, guess what? The same thing goes for masks. Masks are effective at preventing the spread of pathogens from the breath that you exhale. That is, until the mask becomes saturated with those pathogens. Now the mask becomes a spreader of those pathogens. So like gloves, in order for masks to be effective in keeping people healthy, they have to be periodically replaced. So what are the chances that the average person who doesn't know anything about masks other than you have to wear one to get into the grocery store now is going to go through the effort of periodically replacing it?
It's funny how you're playing a clip from Dr. Erickson when he was debunked by so many other scientists and healthcare providers.
No links provided to any of these so-called debunkings in the description, just throwing that out there.
Maybe to regular people who know nothing about science, what he says may seem legit at first. I assume you're part of that category of knowing nothing about science since you're playing the clip in your video. But if you're a biologist like me, or if you've studied any sort of high school science, it's pretty easy to recognize a lot of the nonsense Dr. Erickson is spewing here.
You see, the left has a very strange way of portraying science. They speak of it as if it's this monolithic body of knowledge that you either understand or you don't. They seem to argue as if you have credentials in one particular field of science, you suddenly know everything there is to know about science. Or if you happen to make a scientific argument that they disagree with, they'll jump to the conclusion that you're ignorant about any and all science whatsoever. This type of argumentation kind of leads them in a direction of thinking of science not as an objective endeavor to understand the world, but as sort of almost like a religious doctrine whose conclusions are incontestable.
I'm not saying he's necessarily wrong on the biology, but he's not right either. Let's take this opportunity to debunk some of his claims.
This doesn't make any sense. We wear masks in an acute setting to protect us. We're not wearing masks. Why is that? because we understand microbiology, we understand immunology, and we want strong immune systems. I don't want to hide in my home, develop a weak immune system, and then come out and get disease.
Ah yes, so there's a huge saying going around where people believe that exposing yourself to more pathogens in general is going to strengthen your immune system in the long run, which would supposedly protect you from COVID-19. Now this isn't entirely false, but it's not true either. The idea is something like this, with variations of course. If you commonly expose yourself to pathogens, then your body will get better at fighting them. While this is true, if you're talking about the same pathogens, it's not necessarily the same when it comes to COVID-19, an entirely new virus no one has ever seen before. Our adaptive immune response is specific to what it fights, and their ability to eliminate pathogens the next time around is also specific to what it fought. That's how antibodies and memory cells work. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of it since it's pretty basic biology on how T and B cells work. Just because our immune system is accustomed to fighting one pathogen does not mean it's going to magically get better at fighting another. That is in general of the adaptive immune response, with the exception of closely related pathogen strains, which is not applicable here. Now, that being said, there's a study going on about how the MMR vaccine reduces COVID-19 symptoms. That's because the vaccine, in theory, promotes a higher activity of myeloid-derived suppressor cells, which are responsible for suppressing immune functions such as through the reduction of inflammation. Since a huge portion of COVID symptoms is a result of your own immune activity, this is an indirect symptom alleviator rather than being a direct fighting enhancement against new pathogens. In general, the adaptive immune response is where it's at. Ultimately, that's going to be the main protector you'll have against any sort of invasion. It's the reason why HIV is so potent, because of its ability to inhibit helper T cell function, and the adaptive immune response is specific to what you've seen before. Therefore, even if exposing yourself to a wide range of pathogens seems like an intuitive way to increase immunity, it's not going to do much, if anything, against novel viruses. Now, if your goal is to reduce autoimmunity, which very well does happen if you're not exposed to pathogens, then Dr. Erickson would be correct, but against COVID-19, absolutely not.
Alright, so a couple things to say here. First of all, this was kind of an information dump. He was kind of throwing out all these technical concepts while speaking quickly. Oftentimes when someone is a professional in a particular field, they're used to working around other professionals in that field. They're used to explaining things using all sorts of technical jargon. This is why a lot of times people who are really smart about a particular subject will have difficulty explaining it in a way that makes sense to a layperson. Now, as an IT professional, I'm often finding myself in situations where I have to work with or help people who may not know a whole lot about computers. So I do understand the difficulty of needing to explain technical concepts in a way that a layperson can understand. It can be tricky sometimes, so this I do kind of understand. But what he was basically saying there was that exposing your immune system to a variety of pathogens doesn't necessarily better equip your immune system to deal with COVID-19 specifically. So this guy's an expert in biology and immunology. I'm not, so I'm going to have to kind of take his word on this. But even if it's not necessarily the case that exposing yourself to pathogens in general better prepares your body to deal with COVID-19, maybe the idea is that exposing yourself to COVID-19 makes your immune system better at fighting COVID-19. The idea is that exposing your immune system to a disease enables it to learn what that disease is and then better fight against it. We've seen this happen before with certain other diseases like chickenpox or polio. Someone would catch it, recover, and then never catch it again, even without a vaccine, because their immune system now knows what that disease is and now can be prepared the next time it strikes.
We have both been in the ER through swine flu and through bird flu. Did we shut down for those? Were they much less dangerous than COVID? Is the flu less dangerous than COVID? Let's look at the death rates. No, it's not. They're similar in prevalence and in death rate.
The severity of a disease is not only determined by the death rate. In fact, a higher death rate could very well mean less people die because it wouldn't be able to spread as far. That's why Ebola will never become a global pandemic.
It is true that deadlier diseases tend to spread more slowly because the people who catch them have less of an opportunity to spread them around. I've actually made this point in several of my previous videos I've done on COVID-19. So yeah, less deadly diseases tend to spread around quicker, that's true. However, since the disease is less deadly, wouldn't that also mean it's less of a problem if it spreads around?
The only two types of diseases that really fit the category are coronaviruses and flus. That being said, comparing the seasonal flu with COVID-19 is not accurate. Comparing COVID to any existing pathogen is not accurate. The reason COVID is receiving so much attention is because we know nothing about it. At least we didn't know anything about it. By the time this video is uploaded, we already know quite a bit, but in the context of when Dr. Erickson made these statements, we knew nothing.
So on the one hand, you're saying that coronavirus is not in any way comparable to the flu, and on the other hand, hand, you're saying that coronavirus has properties in common with the flu. I mean, we're always being told we need to listen to the experts and listen to the science. Well, my problem with that is that to a significant extent, the experts in science you want us to listen to keep giving us mixed messages. On the one hand, we're being told that COVID-19 is this brand new disease that is totally new to us and that we know nothing about. And on the other hand, we're being told that COVID-19 is similar to a lot of other viruses we already know about, like SARS.
Dr. Buttar has given his opinion on the use of face masks.
Because as people are allowed to come back into society, their immune systems are already going to have been suppressed because of the wearing of the mask, which is going to increase cortisol levels. It's going to put people into a pseudo-hypoxic state. They're having to suck oxygen through a mask. It drives the cortisol levels up, which then creates a sympathetomimetic drive. It suppresses the lymphocyte subpopulation, decreases the immune system, and renders an individual more susceptible to any type of pathogen, whether it be bacteria, virus, spirochete, mycoplasma, yeast, parasite, whatever.
Increasing cortisol levels does negatively impact immune activity through the psychoneuroimmune system pathway. That part is correct. However, there is a huge leap of logic when claiming that wearing masks cause increased cortisol levels. First, you'd be assuming that masks give people anxiety, which realistically is a bad assumption. I don't know anyone who becomes anxious just because of a thin piece of fabric covering their mouths.
Well, sure, having to wear a piece of cloth over your face in and of itself probably isn't going to cause much anxiety. However, there are other things out there that do in fact cause anxiety, and those things combined with the mask are ultimately what's going to cause problems.
Second, cortisol is the result of more long-term stressors, which is also simply not the case here.
Long-term stressors, so you mean like taking away people's sources of income? Being told that if you go and hang out with your friends, you could be potentially killing vast numbers of people? Those sound like long-term stressors to me.
Short-term stressors would only induce things like increased epinephrine and norepinephrine levels, but even that would really only occur if the individual has trouble breathing, which would only really happen if they have a pre-existing breathing condition. So in conclusion, this is way too specific. It's not going to happen to 99% of people, and even if it does, it still won't happen.
So even if it does happen, it still doesn't happen. Okay, that's some interesting logic there.
So the face mask agenda seems to be, if you look at it from just a safety standpoint, it's highly suspect. If you look at it from a scientific perspective, the agenda is nefarious. The use of a face mask is designed to protect not the doctor or the nurse, but the patient, so that when a surgeon is operating and doing a bypass surgery or a herniorrhaphy or a joint replacement, that if the surgeon sneezes or coughs or drools or spits or whatever, you don't want to get the surgical field contaminated. You want to maintain that sterile field.
That depends entirely on what type of mask you're wearing. If you're wearing the standard surgical masks, then yes, doctors wear it to maintain a clean environment. But when they are seeing COVID patients, they wear N95 masks, which are designed to protect the healthcare workers. The masks required for people to wear in certain public places are regular surgical masks. They're not designed to protect you. They're designed to protect everyone else from you. And if everyone wears them, everyone is protected.
So you have one type of mask that actually provides comprehensive protection both ways, and another kind of mask that literally only works if everybody wears it. And you're suggesting that everybody wear the latter type of mask. Like, do you comprehend how ridiculous that sounds?
On top of that, we breathe out carbon dioxide, but when you've got a mask on, you're actually creating a decrease. You're creating actually an increase in respiratory drive because you get more carbon dioxide coming back from the face mask.
Yes, respiratory rate may increase, but it's not going to be an issue unless you have pre-existing breathing conditions.
Yeah, and people with pre-existing breathing conditions don't need to do things like go to the grocery store or go out in public at all.
It's like building a chain link fence to prevent a fly from getting into your house, or a split rail fence to keep mice out. The viral particles that we're trying to keep out of our bodies are so much smaller than the smallest pore of these masks.
This statement is so wrong and so misleading that Computing Forever should be absolutely ashamed for sharing this on his channel. First of all, yes, viruses are indeed smaller than the pores of the mask, but they don't have to be in order for the mask to stop their transmission. Now, for regular face masks, they hold in the respiratory droplets. Your sneeze or your cough can't get through them. COVID-19 rests on the respiratory droplets, which means they stick onto it. If the water from your coughing can't get out, neither can the virus.
Well, first of all, as I've pointed out in previous videos, the mask doesn't completely stop every and all droplet that comes out of your mouth. It blocks a fair fair portion of them, granted, but not all of them. And even those water droplets that the mask does manage to block, it's not like those virus particles somehow vanish once they're trapped by the mask. At some point, the mask becomes saturated with these water droplet particles, and at this point it essentially loses its effectiveness, because now the mask is actually transporting more pathogens than it's actually blocking. You know those blue fold-out surgical masks that people are wearing? Those aren't actually designed to be worn repeatedly. They're designed to be worn for a couple hours, then replaced. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts that the people wearing those masks around aren't replacing them.
And that is certainly the case because water molecules are polar and adhere to the material of the mask and to each other.
So water molecules are polar and therefore adhere to the material within the mask. It sounds to me then that your mask does protect you after all. See, I knew that the whole canard of my mask protects you, your mask protects me was hogwash basically from the onset, because it implies that the properties of water droplets and their permeability through the mask material somehow changes depending on the direction that they move through the mask, which violates basic principles of physics.
Second of all, if you're wearing an N95 mask, it does actually stop viruses, even ones that don't rest on water droplets.
Wait a second, I thought COVID-19 only could transmit through water droplets. See, this is what I mean. These so-called experts that we're supposed to be listening to can't never give us a straight story.
The virus is still smaller than the pores, but the mask actually uses a different property to stop them from passing through. It contains thin fibers, which actually rely on van der Waals forces. At the microscopic level, everything attracts each other because of van der Waals, so viruses stick right onto the microscopic fibers.
You know, I think that by pointing out that N95 masks actually protect in both directions, he's actually undermining a lot of the mask shaming rhetoric. Like, oh no, if you don't make the kids wear masks, they'll bring COVID-19 home and kill grandma. Okay, well if N95 masks protect the wearer as well, what's stopping grandma from wearing an N95 mask? If grandma ends up catching COVID because you insist that the only thing that should be protecting her are these worthless unidirectional masks, that's on you.
Claiming that masks don't do anything because the viruses are smaller than the pores is completely misleading and dishonest.
But by that same token, claiming that the masks block all of the water droplets that transmit COVID, and that this would necessarily make them effective, is also a bit dishonest and misleading, is it not?
Professor Dolores Cahill has said the following.
If people actually have the symptoms, they should wear a mask. But if you're like me, you had it, there is no need to wear a mask. But what a mask does, it's entirely the wrong thing.
Actually, I agree with what she's saying. If you're sick, not just with COVID, but with anything, it might be a good idea to wear a mask out in public. You see, Shane Killian actually points this out in one of his videos on masks. In a lot of Asian cultures, like China and Japan, it's considered normal for people to wear a mask out in public when they're sick, as not only a courtesy to those around you so you don't get them sick as well, but also as kind of a warning signal. If you're at a grocery store in Japan and you see someone with a mask on, that signals that they're sick with something and you should minimize your contact with them.
Everyone should just wear a mask. If you're sick, wear a mask. If you're not sick, wear a mask. Because 1, you can transmit the disease even before showing symptoms, and 2, even people who have had the disease may not build up an immunity.
There are actually some negative consequences to forcing healthy people to wear masks as well. As I've mentioned a moment ago, in a lot of Asian cultures, masks are considered like a warning signal. Like, hey, I'm sick, you should keep your distance. Well, if now both healthy and sick people are being forced to wear masks, they kind of lose their effectiveness as that warning signal, because now since both healthy and sick people are wearing masks, there's no way to differentiate between the two. Who can I congregate with, and who should I keep my distance from? There's no way to know.
It turns out that about 20 to 30% of people don't produce appropriate antibody levels. I'm actually working in 2 COVID-19 clinical trials, and our definition of acceptable antibody levels are only present in a fraction of people who have recovered from the virus.
Okay, well I don't know what particular definition of acceptable levels your particular laboratory works with, or what sort of rationale was used in order to determine that acceptable level, and I'd imagine that there'd be some variance depending on the specific person's body involved. For example, a person with a lower BMI might need less antibodies in order to hold up an effective defense. I can't really say that he's wrong here, because in order to do that I'd have to actually look at the research that he's doing and the epistemic processes involved, but it definitely seems like some additional information may need to be in order before we can draw any conclusions.
There are also plenty of cases of people testing positive again even after recovering. Be responsible and wear a mask.
Actually be responsible and do your own research and make your own decisions about your own health.
Professor Judy Mikovits has also said this.
Wearing the mask literally activates your own virus. You're getting sick from your own reactivated coronavirus expressions. And if it happens to be SARS-CoV-2, then you've got a big problem.
Computing Forever clearly doesn't understand even the most basics of science and biology if he's sharing all these clips from people who have been debunked over and over again by the medical community.
Actually, what that lady was saying in that video there actually made perfect sense. If you have coronavirus and you're continuously breathing coronavirus into a mask, then let's say you were to recover and no longer have coronavirus, but you were to continue wearing the same mask you were before when you had it. You're now basically reinfecting yourself thanks to the mask.
In fact, I've even done a video myself on this documentary he's showing here. It's ridiculous how little fact-checking this guy can do and just pick out whatever source he can find that somehow supports his own narrative on face masks, and without fact-checking a single thing within it, post it to his channel to deceive tens of thousands of people watching the video. But then again, I'm not surprised. He does this for literally everything. I talked about his climate change videos before, which are arguably even more ridiculous than this one.
You know, we're always told we need to listen to the science, listen to the experts, and then when the science or experts comes out with data that undermines their position, that's fake science. Those are fake experts. They don't know what they're talking about. And if it was just like a fringe group of whack jobs publishing this data that undermines what the left argues, that would be one thing. But there's actually large segments of well-known medical journalists publishing this data, and we're still told to believe they're just a fringe whack jobs. They don't know what they're talking about. This is what I was talking about before. The left wing likes to pay lip service to science but doesn't know the first thing about what science actually is. And maybe it is the case that the experts at Computing Forever sites are just a bunch of whack jobs who don't know what they're talking about. And if that ends up being the case, I will go ahead and in the description put some links to some other well-renowned and respected medical information sources that are actually criticizing things like shutdown orders and masks.
Certainly, the mandatory enforcement of masks is an infringement of individual human rights and bodily autonomy.
Oh yeah? What rights are you violating?
My right to decide what to wear on my own face, my right to make decisions regarding my own health, the rights of business owners and private property owners to determine the basis on which they interact with others. There's probably more than that, but those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head.
What bodily harm are you causing?
Well, anytime you mandate something, there's a threat of violence. That means that if something is mandated and you refuse to do it, at some point violence is used against you. Now, they might not immediately resort to violence. They usually put some extra steps in between. They give you opportunities to comply, but at some point they'll either kidnap you into a cage or kill you for resisting. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but there's kind of an element of irony to mandating public health measures. We're keeping you safe by putting you in danger.
Please come forth and instead of presenting pseudoscience about how masks harm your body, try to, I don't know, actually educate yourself on physiology or fact check the things you post on your channel. Then come up with an argument that at least somewhat conforms with reality. Because so far your video here has been a big failure.
Even if his arguments regarding the efficacy of masks aren't entirely accurate, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the efficacy of the masks is only part of the story. Even if the masks really are as effective as you say they are, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fair or even effective to force people to wear them against their will.
You have no right to go around publicly without a mask because you could get someone sick. If people still cannot see that this manufactured crisis is simply being used as an excuse to remove individual rights and freedoms and control people, then I honestly don't know how to help them.
If you're directly harming another human being, potentially killing them, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, I agree. If your actions are putting others in danger or potentially killing them, that is unacceptable. I think maybe there could be some situations or circumstances where someone should be forced to wear a mask. Like if they're sick, or if you're around vulnerable people, like if you're at a nursing home. But a lot of the people in the pro-mask crowd are making it out to be as if anytime you walk out your front door without a mask, you're killing somebody's grandmother. Risk is an inherent part of life. If someone's attacking you, then yes, you have a right to self-defense, but you don't get to just force people to wear handcuffs because you're afraid they might potentially possibly punch you. That's not how that works.
Your right to do whatever the hell you want does not triumph over the lives of others.
You know, I like how on this one particular specific issue, the left all of a sudden buys into the non-aggression principle. Like, if you're not handing over a portion of your paycheck to spend on whatever the fuck I want, they want to send men with guns to hurt you. If you're not operating your business within the regulations that you think they should, they want to send men with guns to hurt you. But on this particular issue, they buy into the idea that your right to do as you please only extends insofar as you're not hurting anyone else. The left takes the same attitude to moral principles as they do to science. It's only true when it's convenient for us. So I'm not an expert in biology or medicine the way this guy is, so I can't necessarily vouch for how well masks will protect you or those around you. So the only thing I can tell you is do some research, do your homework, learn about masks, figure out the pros and cons of wearing one, and make your decision accordingly. This has been Philosopos of Making Stupidity Play Dead. Have a good one.